Hello. As Rachel said, I'm Kevin Bigler, Senior Software Engineer at Cambia Health Solutions. I've been there around 6 years now. Last few years, I've been working on the team that manages the healthcare member website. So people with health insurance through one of Cambia's regional health insurance providers across several states would go to this website if they need to, say, find a doctor in their plan, or manage medications, or even find mental health resources. My team, so I'm on the team that leads like solution architecture and the development for the website, and also the authentication systems for that website and the mobile app. We've got millions of members across several states, and this is, it's healthcare related, so this is a necessity for our members that they have access to the site. One core principle at Cambia that we live by, we try and focus our work around, relates to this quote from our CEO, and that is that we come into work to be person-focused, to help people not fall through the cracks. So my team's responsibility in that area is to make sure that anyone who needs healthcare resources gets those resources when they need it through our website. So this empathy is really what drives us as our motivation. And later you'll see that it also kind of informs the types of tooling that we use to support our members. So we're dealing not just with technical problems on technical systems, but real problems for real people. Here's a question then. What do we do if one of those members can't access those healthcare resources, but our backend monitoring says everything's fine? This is a question that came up with us a year ago when we were supporting our members. And I want you to think also, for a critical feature that you have, what if your users could not use that crucial feature and all your monitoring is saying things are fine? What we discovered is that real user monitoring is not just a tool to measure performance metrics like page load time and view time, but it's also a very useful tool, a crucial tool in our monitoring toolkit. This is one way I like to think about RUM, real user monitoring, RUM, is that if we are, again, concerned with our real, these are real people going through real experiences, real user monitoring captures that information real time. What I mean by that is those who are interacting with our website or our mobile app, RUM will capture the data as far as how they interact with the website or the mobile app. Again, it's sort of like an intuitive connection here that we're dealing with people. Here's the tool that we need to introduce. Another way I like to visualize this, I'm a very visual person, so you'll see a lot of different graphics here, is that we have a lot of different layers that we need to monitor, right? You've got the front end with the user. Real user monitoring covers that aspect. On the flip side, you've got server with service logs. Of course, there are many different other monitoring tools, but just kind of keeping the picture simple here. In the middle then, monitoring our API performance would be APM, or application performance monitoring. But I want you to think about this question. What if the connection is never made? I will share with you some key experiences that we've had at Cambia over the past year that have led us to the conclusions that I'm outlining here. That backend metrics will tell us only half of the story. Oftentimes, in fact, what users experience will differ from what our systems report, and RUM gives us that missing perspective. To start off, I want to share our first story with you, which occurred 1 year ago. So, rewinding time, now it's summer 2024. The weather is beautiful, maybe a little warm, but perfect for bike riding. My family and I actually like to go cycling on this little island in the river. It's like a 12-mile loop. And you may have seen biking teams, they'll stay close together so that the person at the lead will cut through the headwind and kind of make it a little bit easier on the people behind them. A little bit similar to that with this story here, I'm starting an on-call rotation. So in a way, I'm kind of like rotating to the lead of the team and taking on headwind for them. This might look familiar to you. This is a pain scale. So you might have seen it in a doctor's office. They ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain are you in? I wanted to use this as a representation so that you can get a visual understanding of where my state of mind was as I go throughout this on-call rotation, which is a 2-week sprint. So I start the on-call rotation actually being handed off no incidents, so there was no pain. But a couple days in, I received an incident. A member had called into customer service and stated that they could not access the member website. The sign-in was failing for them. So that got routed to me. And really at this point, you notice I'm in the green here as far as the pain level. That's because we received these incidents fairly frequently. And so at this point in time, we'd already developed a pretty robust run book with regard to sign-in incidents. So I followed the steps almost like a checklist. And what was interesting here is that the first step, maybe it's similar to the first step you would take looking into a user's issue, which is to go straight to the logs. Now, the logs for this user at the time they said they couldn't sign in actually showed that their sign-in was successful. This disparity between what was reported and what was in the logs, we chalked up to user error or possibly misunderstanding. We've got an audience, a user base of all different ages and all different levels of comfortability with technology. And sometimes we can also fall short as far as how intuitive our UI is. So it is kind of reasonable to sometimes say that the resolution is user error or maybe confusion. We get these maybe once or twice a month. But then 2 days later, within that same on-call rotation, I get another sign-in incident with the same exact resolution of user error. So my curiosity is piqued. We don't usually get these that often, but I'm not too concerned. Because again, I'm following all our steps. We had spent months at this point on the run book, but even years on the observability around it. But then within the first week of that on-call rotation, I got a third incident. Same thing, sign-in incident. Person says they couldn't sign in, but logs say they did. What's going on here? I, at this point, started to get really concerned. It was really eating at me, trying to think, what is this person experiencing that they would feel like their sign-in is failing when, in fact, our logs are showing that their sign-in was succeeding, right? Like, what's going on? So just to recap the situation we're in, we've got members reporting login issues where the backend monitoring is showing no issues whatsoever. We are kind of curious. We're not sure why there's this disparity between the reports and our monitoring. But we're starting to get these more rapidly, these support tickets. So we're left with the question, what are we missing? Spoiled it a little there. You might have noticed from the session description anyway. At this stage, when I was still in the red, so to speak, with the pain chart, it occurred to me that recently we had implemented real user monitoring. I knew of it. I actually took a session on it a couple of years ago here, but I thought of that more like for performance and figuring out how well your app is doing in that way. But we had a much more experienced member of our team with RUM. So I went to him and asked, hey, can you show me how I can search for this user from this incident and see in RUM like what they went through in their sessions? So he graciously obliged. And we started off, this is a screenshot of searching in RUM sessions by user ID. And so we plugged in some kind of user ID for one of these incidents. And this is an actual screenshot for one of those. And you notice for this person, there's this list of sessions at the bottom half of this. And it kind of chronological order goes bottom to top. But this is the number of times this user tried to log in with the site. And it did correlate with our logs. So we weren't surprised at this stage. We're like, okay, well that tracks one-to-one. But you notice this many times in this short period of time, you know, they're trying to log in at 9 o'clock and then 1:50 and then 2 o'clock and then the next day. You know, it's like they're trying over and over and over, kind of like pounding on the door, like they really need something, but not getting it. So let's take a look at one of these sessions. Drilling down, right off the bat, your eyes probably go straight to those errors that keep happening, right? So those are JavaScript errors that the user experienced. One of those that keeps happening is a Next.js error. Didn't mean a whole lot to us at first because we hadn't seen this before, but luckily that error message has a link to documentation to explain that, hey, your page is not rendering. There's some kind of error that's bubbling up and not being caught from a rendering point of view. So this was the ultimate fallback error message. Around the same time as well, the member, like I said, they were trying really hard to get in, so they called customer service a second time within just a couple days, which tells you a lot. I mean, you've waited on hold on customer service before, how much time and energy it takes. So again, just like a testament to how important this was to them. But they called in and they actually provided a screenshot. This is what they saw. So they tried to log in and then suddenly, boom, the page isn't loading. They just get this error. So of course, somebody who goes through that experience, when I describe it like that, feels like, oh, the sign-in is failing. So even though the API requests for login were succeeding, which is why we kept seeing those successes in the logs, the rendering that occurred after that was failing. So it really was a wake-up call, and sort of like, it took a minute for it to sink in, but it was an epiphany that, oh, all right, so sometimes when somebody calls in with an issue, it could be totally on the front end, and our back-end monitoring will not catch it. It started kind of like turning the gears in our minds on what this means, the implications for our incident response. Oops. I told you earlier, this type of issue where a sign-in incident came to us and you know, it looked like user error, happened once or twice a month. We then thought, now that we realize that is the case for these like 3 incidents, well, does it explain the incidents from the past few months? The one or two a month? But no, that was just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, when we searched that error message historically in RUM, we found that it had happened dozens of times per day. That is just, it was such a, do I want to know this type of information? You know, glad to know it. I mean, knowing that there is a problem and kind of what the problem is the first step. But yeah, this had been going on for months and we were just unaware. When I'm on call and there's a new kind of issue, new type of issue, I usually like to create a dashboard so I can start plotting things like next to each other and get a different view. So that's what I did next. I took that type of search. There were actually 2 JavaScript error messages together that kept occurring. So this dashboard shows the occurrences for those 2 errors and has a list where I could like click into any of those. By the way, I'm mentioning JavaScript errors. Literally, if I could go to that user's browser and open up the console, it would be error messages that happen in the console. Which is great, to be honest, because maybe you can relate to this. My mom calls me every so often for technical support and you know, asks like, there's this issue I'm having with a website. And so my first inclination is to try and get a view of what she's doing, like a screen share or screenshots or something, and to ask her questions for context around it. Like, what were you doing leading up to this? You know, this website, you go to it often. Did you type in the website or did you click on a bookmark? You know, asking questions. And if I needed to, I could even look at the JavaScript console. Now, with millions of members, obviously we can't do that for everybody. I mean, that's just a given. But luckily, real user monitoring collects a lot of this key information for us real time so that we can assess it and take on these incidents as they come. Not only that, now we are able to focus on mitigating this problem for the future. So again, with our person-focused attitude, we wanted to make sure that this issue, which was honestly was kind of sporadic, it was hard to reproduce. Again, another bonus for using RUM, because if it's hard to reproduce, but at least it occurred, at least RUM captured the information for it. Yeah, we went down the path to start fixing this issue for those members. This was a case, like I alluded to at the beginning, where the connection is just not made from front end to back end. So we finally, at this point, realized we had a blind spot. No matter how hard we were working up till this point, we just didn't know that it was there, it's a blind spot. And so before we thought those were user errors, now we realize our monitoring is incomplete. And RUM illuminates that blind spot for us. Really, again, I'm hammering this part home because it's just so critical for the way of thinking about this, but we were missing the user's perspective before. The next story is a continuation or the growth that happened after that discovery. We started to, with this realization, start to think, what if we use RUM first in our incident response? Instead of, this was a case where we looked at the logs and then we chose to go to RUM. But that experience that we had showed us just how nice it is to use RUM as a view of what your user went through. So we chose to start using that to get a view of like the user's lens. But really this whole thing was just about changing the way we think about incident response. With our typical approach of checking those service logs, they're great for capturing tons of useful information. But as login as an example, there are several different services involved in producing a response for login requests, just one API request, there's several. And even the best of logs are somewhat esoteric, where you kind of need like the service owner to explain sometimes or to direct you right to the most important pieces. And if there's several services, maybe several interpreters, it's not ideal. It's like you're searching for puzzle pieces scattered across different services. And even when you have those, you kind of like sift through and like look at each puzzle piece, wondering, does this have to do with what the user said they just experienced? Or do I need to know this as well? Like they failed login. Do I need to look for all the service logs for like password reset or account recovery leading up to this for several days? And if so, there's just so many things to check. And once I put those together, even at that point, I'm making inferences like, I think that the user did this based on this information. On the flip side though, real user monitoring reads a lot like a story. With the user sessions grouping information in a much more intuitive way, you actually don't even need to know much of the like under the hood or infrastructure information. Instead, you can go in and like a book, you can just open it up, see, oh, I see that the user landed on the login page, and then, oh, what did it say here? They clicked on the button, and finally, here's the JavaScript error. And if I need to, I can flip back a few chapters and see, oh yeah, they went through the account recovery 2 days ago. Here's what happened then. So with the classic approach, as I mentioned, we kind of started with the backend and try to sift through to figure out what applies to this user and their incident. But we reverse that. Instead, we start with the user with something that we know they went through, and then directly tie that back to the backend information that we need, which we've got application performance monitoring traces set up with our RUM and our logs. So it's actually really nice to go through, we can click through somebody's user session, and if we find an error that might be an API error, you can actually just click from that to the logs that correspond with that API request. It's kind of insane because we spent a lot of effort before that trying to add like request IDs on both ends and manually tie those things together. But with traces, you can literally just click through and go back and forth, and it's really awesome. So at this point, it's a change in thinking, it's a change in approach. With that and an on-call engineering practice requires a lot of like advocacy and sharing that type of rethinking of approach across our team, and explain that if we reverse our troubleshooting process, starting with the user, then we can use RUM as the foundation of our user stories and answer the question of what else we're missing. As an example, then, or by doing this, we can then capture the complete user journey, identify friction points invisible to the backend, quantify those actual user impacts, and prioritize based on their real experience and not assumptions. This final story occurred a few months after the first one. So seasons changed, now it's autumn, which in the Pacific Northwest, autumn is really beautiful. The leaves are changing and the air is nice and crisp and cool. There's maybe a slight breeze. And then I start my on-call rotation, immediately hit with a widespread outage. So now I need to bring back this pain chart and show you where I was at to start with on my on-call rotation. What a way to start, right? It's nice and cool outside, but I'm already sweating from all of this anxiety Our users are all reporting on our member website they can't log in. And really, one of the worst parts of that is nothing went off to tell us that this was happening. The first time we noticed this was just an employee happened to try and told us that they saw an issue. So now we're scrambling, trying to find something. We can't find anything in logs or APM that will explain this, and just we're grasping at straws. And now it's lasting a whole hour. So that is a long time for our members to not be able to access this healthcare, the resources on our website. Like I said before, this is a necessity for those people. Like, who knows what they're going through that they need this right now. And the website being down is delaying their journey of like getting the care that they need. So it's, my anxiety's up here right now. And at 1 hour, it just kind of auto-resolves. Very peculiar. We didn't know why it happened in the first place. And you can see my pain is not all the way down yet. It's very high because at least people can get in, but I don't know why this happened. Even like the very smart people from different teams who all came together, we can't figure something out to explain the cause. So of course we're worrying about this happening again. And it happened again. So again, the next day, we had another widespread outage. People couldn't log in, another full hour. And now we're going into the weekend, and it happens a third time. And can you relate to this? I had to adjust the pain scale here, you saw, because experiencing some very impactful issue for your users just before going into a weekend is crazy, because everybody's going to be gone. And at this point still, we had no smoking gun. We didn't know how to monitor this other than just check every so often. So we're very, very anxious about this and have a lot of pressure to figure out the root cause. So with our anxiety skyrocketing and pressure intensifying, sorry, this is just a recap, but we've got user-reported incidents, outages, sorry, lasting a full hour, but auto-resolving mysteriously, recurring every day or so, with no explanation on the back end. So we're scratching our heads, more like pulling our hair out, trying to figure out what's going on. Luckily, somebody on our team just was looking at the RUM information we had, some of the errors, and they found something that wasn't directly tied to login. It was kind of an auxiliary piece. He was kind of like, what is this? Is that important? So he found some 504 timeout errors happening a lot in RUM. And I decided to take the 504 errors and plot them on a graph to try and see, does it correlate with our outage window? I created a dashboard like I am wont to do. And one of the stages that I was at with this dashboard was that I've got these 504 errors plotted. And wouldn't you know it, they correlate exactly with the outage window. So right when it started, this mountain of 504 errors starts, and right as the outage ended, the 504 errors stop. So it may not explain the root cause, but at least it gives us something to monitor, better than just checking ourselves every so often. Now, we thought, okay, well, let's explore. You know, we compared lots of different things like you do when you're trying to figure out a very peculiar issue. And at one point we thought, okay, well maybe this one service has something to do with it. So we added service errors for that that particular service. And what we saw was there were 2 error messages punctuating the end of the outage window that said fatal error. Now, the wheels are turning a little bit here. We thought, fatal error, oh, that means that the service on the container crashed, but not the container itself. So maybe there's some kind of like resource consumption issue. So we added the memory usage to the same dashboard. And again, under the mountain of 504 errors, right below the punctuating fatal errors, you see the memory usage just steadily increasing over that whole outage window. And by this point, we start to realize that looks like a telltale sign of a memory leak, server side, where RUM was the first indicator of the problem. And that's just crazy to me. This was a great example where RUM combined with other metrics will give you views that you wouldn't have otherwise. It didn't replace those others, but it was our first signal in this case. So as we just saw, RUM identified the issue, logs confirmed the root issue, and our infrastructure metrics, the memory metrics, confirmed our suspicions that this was a memory leak. So bringing back the pain chart here, we're back in the green. So that whole process did wonders for our pain. Now, implementing RUM did have its challenges, and I want to share some of those with you. We are a healthcare company at Cambia. So we've got strict privacy and compliance standards to adhere to. So even getting RUM implemented in the first place was a big challenge. We had some technical limitations, but again, there was mostly some organizational resistance, I guess. So we needed to make some concessions in order to feel comfortable ourselves. We want to protect privacy of our members, and also to kind of get buy-in from those in charge. So what we did was, first of all, we disabled the session playback and recording. And if you're familiar with RUM already, earlier when I explained some of our issues we went through, you might have been wondering, why wouldn't you just look at the session playback? It's like, duh. But we didn't have it. With session playback in RUM, you can actually see where somebody goes in your site or your app, what they click on. You know, frustration signals are very, they're a fan favorite as well. You can see where that happened. And you can mask the information that's shown. But again, just kind of like trying to make a compromise on getting this implemented in the first place, we decided to just disable it outright. The second thing that we did to overcome this hurdle of privacy and compliance issues was to make sure that the IDs we use for our users in RUM has no real world meaning. So we're using surrogate identifiers instead of some personally identifiable thing. So earlier when you saw I was searching by a user ID, is a surrogate ID. These last two are tied close together. They both have to do with console logging. Normally when you're developing on the front end of a web app, if you do like console.log, console.error, you wouldn't be worried about that information making it outside of the browser. It would usually just be contained. But for our implementation, we decided you need to make sure that what you're logging in your console to errors has nothing that we'd be worried about exposing to Datadog, so no sensitive information. And then also kind of similar to that, we just chose to share the console errors and not like console logs or the info level. But at least that gave us a lot of information to start with. Those were some of the compromises we made so that we can get RUM out the door and actually using it. Second challenge, the other challenge I want to talk about is just about expanding the usage. This type of way of thinking about incidents is just so different. At least for us, it was so different from, I want to support a user, this real person, I care about their experience, but when they tell me there's an issue, I go straight to the system. That's sort of ingrained in us. So this change of thinking, you kind of have to mull it over a little bit, at least I think so. And to some degree, if you experience something where you try this out, and then you're like, oh, wow, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I do this in the first place? It takes a little bit of time to spread that across the organization. So, and formalize that with playbooks and make sure that we have great documentation around it. So an example in our playbook would be to first check RUM for the user impact, then correlate what we found with our backend metrics using the traces like I showed or mentioned earlier. Then identify the affected user segments, and finally prioritize based on the real impact. Just to conclude, I want to talk about the benefits of using, that we've enjoyed using RUM in our incident response. Our mean time to resolution for sign-in incidents has decreased by 20%, and it's actually steadily decreasing still. Like I mentioned, it takes a little while to spread this across the org. We've got faster identification of front-end issues, and our engineering team is happier because we're not left wondering, what are we missing? In fact, instead, we know exactly where to look for these user errors and understand what the user went through. It's a great feeling to know that we're not letting these members fall through the cracks. This is the final slide, don't worry. The key takeaways then is that RUM provides the user perspective. If you want to know what they went through, see it through their lens, use real user monitoring. And sometimes RUM will catch things that traditional monitoring on the back end can't see. It's great to use either way, even for things that are represented on the back end, it's much easier. RUM is well worth the challenges of implementation, and if you start with your user experience and then go backward, you'll figure out what's missing in your monitoring. So that was how we figured out what was missing with our monitoring, and I would challenge you to think about what's missing in your monitoring strategy, and I suggest that real user monitoring is the answer. Thank you.
So we have time for a few questions. There's microphones in the two different aisles here. If you have a question and we're not going to be able to get to it, and it's RUM specific, if you go down on the expo floor, we have a bunch of demos for RUM, and other Datadog employees would be able to help you out there. Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
This may be a really obvious question, but how did you get this? Sorry, how did you get the client error in the first example to bubble up server side? Is that the React framework that did that?
So that error never made it server side. That was a rendering issue, like solely on the front end. It never made it to the back end. In other cases where we discover an error with RUM and we want to correlate it, I didn't have screenshots here, I'm sorry, but there is a way, if you implement APM tracing in RUM and implement APM tracing in your logs, you can actually start with like the user session on RUM and just click straight through the tracing to the logs. Or vice versa, if you start with the logs, you would see the RUM.
Also source maps, depending on how you bundle your assets.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we did have to add source maps to see the real source, yeah.
Yeah, did you implement anything to catch there proactively, like a synthetic test? I know you're health clear, so maybe that's hard to do, but this seems like a pretty reactive thing. So would you able to doing it on the front end only side to really help catch leveling and stuff? Yeah,
we've, so for the outage, I believe we did add a monitor so that we can keep track of that at least short term. In other cases, it's kind of hard with the front-end error messages. There's a lot of noise, so managing the signal to noise is tough. We've had synthetic tests before, but we do kind of struggle sometimes to get them like robust enough to catch something that is like meaningful. So, I mean, they're useful, but in these cases I mentioned, we couldn't have anticipated or created a synthetic test for it. Good question.
Hey, we've gotten, I'd say, the first couple of steps of implementing RUM done at our company. So the replays are great. The auto instrumentation that comes out of the box with their NPM packages is pretty solid. We've got our source map set up. But would you say there's any additional instrumentation or specific things you're recording or looking for that have been really helpful for debugging?
Oh, for debugging?
Yeah, beyond just here's what it ships with by default. We're collecting everything from the console.
Gotcha. What I've found to be most useful is it is sort of reactive like the other individual mentioned, but when we, like either in our QA testing or in the live environment, if some issue happens and we notice that there's a RUM error, then we'll use that and kind of like, you know, use that to manage the signal to noise. But I think otherwise, nothing comes to mind at least. I think that's all that comes to mind.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the question.
For RUM metrics, sampling rates and its related costs are a concern for engineering teams and the overall business. Given that you were able to hone in on individual user IDs, how did you balance the sampling rates during the issue? Did you increase them temporarily, or how did that work?
I couldn't answer that for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the other RUM experts might be able to answer a question similar to that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, check out RUM Without Limits. It helps that a lot.
Yeah. I appreciate the question, though. Sorry I couldn't answer.
Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's have another round of applause for Kevin.